So culture fit bias. So this is one of those interesting phenomenons, right? So how many times have you either been on an interview panel or have actually heard people talk about this phenomenon that the person was not the right fit, right? So yeah, so that's an interesting phenomenon, right? This idea of fit. So fit. So it's kind of like, and I don't want to go down this rabbit hole too deep, but like the difference between joy and happiness, right? So joy typically is what you experience in the moment, and then when you reflect on it, you'd say that made me happy, right? So happy is a reflective kind of thing. And joy is in the moment. So when we think about this idea of cultural fit, I get a little bit I get concerned and confused all at the same time, right? Because what we're actually saying is that this person did not fit our organization. So we're grading them on something, but all too often we haven't told them what we're looking for, right? So here's a question: how does one get a degree in fit? How do I know what it means to fit in an organization? Um, and so how fair is it to be judged on something that you've never been told what it is? And secondly, you don't even know that you're being judged on that. Like, just interesting, right? Interesting. So let's talk a little bit about that. So I have two images here. So we'll call them A and B. And I want you to think for yourself, which of these two images appeals to you most? Is it A or is it B? Which appeals to you most? All right. So you've made your choice. Okay, cool. I want you to tell me, out of these, are these the same shapes? Is letter A and letter B the same? Do they create the same shapes? Are they the same shapes? Okay. So we have people have either selected letter A or letter B, and you've just answered whether they're the same choice. And so which one of these, A or B, is correct or right? Which one is wrong or incorrect? All right, so I think many of you see what I'm going after, right? You can see where I'm going with this with this story. All too often, when I ask this question, the majority of people select A as being something that they have a greater affinity towards, right? So they appreciate, they like letter A as opposed to letter B. And then when I ask, are these the same shapes? I get mixed responses, right? Because some people say, no, they're not the same shapes because letter A forms a square and letter B is chaos, right? But what is the truth about letter A and the letter B? Are they in fact the same shapes? And the answer is yes, they are the same shapes. They all are a bunch of Pac-Man, right? Or incomplete pie charts, right? So they are the same. So our fit bias comes in because now here's something I want you to write down, because I didn't put this on the screen, but I want you to write this down. This one is for free. We don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. We see the world as we are, not as it is. And so when we think about this idea of culture fit or the right fit bias, what we're actually saying is, I'm going to judge this person not by concrete standards, but by a subjective ruler that I have created, right? And so when we think about that, how actually fair is that? If we consider our hiring processes to be a fair and just process, how fair and just is that to judge someone on something that they're not even aware? And quite honestly, we may not necessarily even be aware of the specific things that we're looking for as we talk about this idea of culture fit, right? So just think about that. Think about this exercise as you go into these conversations around culture fit, because what we'll find is that our inclination is to look for people who are most like me. Hire people who are like me. And so here are a few principles to remember around trying to create inclusive environments, right? That diversity and inclusion are those things that we acquire, right? So we go out, we seek those things, we inquire about diversity to get those commonalities and differences. That then we start to build this idea of psychological safety, and then that leads us to the sense of this feeling of inclusion, where people feel like they can be engaged, they can commit to being there. And then ultimately that inclusion leads us to this sense of belonging, where people bring their best selves to work, right? They bring their best selves, because this becomes the objective of the cultural fit bias, right? And so when we think about this idea of the cultural fit bias, I'm going to just flip back just for a second. Because one of the things we have to be honest about and true about is it's fine to say that culture and the someone fitting in our culture is important, but we have to say that either to the candidate themselves or at least as a committee to ourselves first. So what is the criteria that we're looking for around culture fit or about right fit, right? So what is that ahead of time, so that when we go into the interview process, we know exactly what we're looking for, as opposed to it being some subjective thing on the back end that could, be seen as prejudice, that could be seen as an act of discrimination, because we didn't do those things ahead of time. So it's not that we can't have a right fit. It's not that we can't have a culture fit, but let's identify those things ahead of time, so that when the time comes, we know exactly what we're looking for. Just like we did earlier with triangles, we did here with squares. Know what we're looking for, and then we'll find it when we engage with folks, or we won't find it as we engage with folks, right? So that's important, because this culture fit thing is can get really funny, right? So what is culture fit? How's it defined? How does it add value? What is the purpose of the fit? How do we measure that fit? These are the kinds of conversations we should be having around culture fit, even before we get into the interview process, so that the whole interviewing team, the hiring manager, can be clear in their own head as to what that means, right? And so in this cartoon, it says, for a fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam, and we want everyone to climb the tree. Well, the dog could possibly climb the tree. The fish can't. The elephant can't. The penguin can't. The monkey can, and the bird obviously could be in the tree, right? So this idea of culture fit is, if you're asking for something that people aren't able to do, then that could be seen a particular kind of way. So we're going to continue on. And so when we think about this idea of even of culture, right? So we have high context cultures and low context cultures. Low context cultures means that the words mean a lot, right? So the words are important. They're specific. They are the law, right? So very contract driven. very pragmatic in terms of what people say is what they mean, and that kind of thing. When we think about higher context cultures, we recognize that relationships are important, the context is important, situations is important. And so as we communicate with these cultures, we have to recognize that that high context means that we must have much more engagement with relationships than we do in other ways. So when we think about even our organizations, are we a high context culture where we follow rules and we follow procedures to the letter, or do we navigate people through our organization through relationships? How does tenure serve in your organization, right? What does it mean to navigate? Who are leaders, and then who has leadership, right? So sometimes there can be people in your organization that don't have a title of leader, but they function as a leader. And so that would be a higher context environment. And so when you think about what your organization needs, are you more on a lower context where we follow things by the book and by procedure, or a higher context where relationships and contexts and situations drive people's behavior? So when we think about this fit bias, what are we looking for in terms of, or what are we talking about in terms of high context, low context environments? And what is our organization? How does our organization operate or function? So some of these things will be a bit antiquated, but oftentimes when we talk about this fit bias, people make decisions, life-changing decisions for employees, because oftentimes, let me tell you, there have been some jobs that I've had that have actually changed the trajectory of my life. Right. So by securing this job, I have changed the future of my children and my lineage because I've had particular opportunities. Right. But sometimes they're judged on frivolous things. Right. So first, the handshake. Now, let's think about this. So when people talk about the handshake, what does that look like? What are they talking about? We need, I just shook someone's hand and I know stuff about them. So what is the handshake supposed to tell us about a person? It's supposed to tell us if they're confident. It's supposed to tell us if they're honest, if they're strong, their ability to, navigate conflict, all of this stuff in about a 3 to 4 second handshake. I'm supposed to learn all this stuff, right? Is it possible that the handshake could actually not tell me anything about a person? Is that possible? Is it possible that things like coronavirus could make people adverse to shaking hands, or maybe it's not within their culture, maybe it's not something that they like to do? What does a handshake actually tell me about job performance? And I don't know that I don't have an answer for that, but I think it's an interesting question to ponder, right? Eye contact. So what is eye contact? So people say, you look honest if you make eye contact with people. You're trustworthy if you make eye contact with people. Well, let me just ask this question. Is it possible that a con man can look you straight in the eye, shake your hand firmly, and still run their con? Yes, they can, right? So what does eye contact tell you about a person's ability to do a job? I would suggest that that's a question we have to ask. I don't know that I necessarily have an answer for you. I have an answer for me, but I wonder if there are people, and what role does culture play? What does life experience play? What does the role demand in terms of eye contact, right? So really thinking about that. And then sometimes we'll ask people to talk about their achievement. Well, what if my inclination is that, I don't raise myself above the group? Like my inclination or how I've been raised or taught is that I'm a member of a group more than I am an individual of that group. And so sometimes we'll ask questions, or we'll get potential employees to talk about, or we want them to talk about themselves, but they end up talking about something else. They talk about their participation in the group or what the group did, and we're not savvy enough to read in between the lines that maybe possibly that their contribution in the group was their form of leadership, right? Oftentimes we don't do that. So when we talk about this fit bias, we talk about what the right fit is. What exactly are we talking about? Because a handshake, eye contact, or being able to talk about what I did outside of my membership in a group may not necessarily relate directly to the work that is required to be done. Tom Cruise has played an astronaut. He's been an international spy. He's been a fighter pilot. He's been an investigator, right? Tom Cruise has done all of these things as his role as an actor. So he learned how to do these things. So is it possible that interviewing is a skill that can be learned, but not necessarily relate directly to outcomes and to the production of work products, right? So is that possible? Just I want you to think about that. So what happens when? So what do we mean by not fitting in? So not only do we need to talk about what it means to fit in, but what actually do we mean by not fitting in, right? So typically when people talk about negative behaviors, they talk about the inability to express oneself clearly, or poor voice or diction or grammar, the lack of interest in the organization, the lack of planning for a career, the lack of zeal, poise, or confidence. Overemphasizing money is typically not fitting in. Unwilling to start at the bottom, expects too much too soon, intolerant, has strong prejudices in all their forms, lacks the appreciation of value of experience, and asks no questions about the job. And so those are some things that people typically think about in terms of not fitting in. I would challenge you, though, that are there some cultural things or some generational things that we might want to be mindful of when looking at this particular list of not fitting in? And so so when we think about this culture fit bias, it becomes important that we recognize these things as we try to move forward in the process, because context is everything. And if you don't understand the context, you don't understand the behavior. And so if we haven't set a context for our what it means to fit in, or what it means to be a part of our culture, then we can miss opportunities to see the best that people can offer. So